Thomas Greene, a hard-working homeowner, returns home expecting a peaceful evening. After a long day at work, Thomas's only desire is to unwind in the sanctuary of his own home. He lives in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the houses are neatly lined up, lawns trimmed to perfection, and mailboxes all painted in the same shade as dictated by the HOA. For Thomas, his home is his refuge. The garage door rising at the end of the day has always been a symbol of privacy and safety. On this particular evening, the sun was setting, casting golden rays across the driveway as he clicked the garage door opener in his car. The mechanical hum of the door rising was familiar, but what greeted him on the other side was anything but. Sitting there, bold as daylight, was a gleaming black SUV. It wasn't a neighbor's car he recognized, nor the delivery truck of some new service. Its polished chrome grille reflected his stunned expression as he rolled to a stop in disbelief. The SUV was large, expensive, and completely out of place, taking up his parking spot as though it belonged there. Thomas's mind raced. Had his wife invited someone over? Had a contractor come by unannounced? Nothing made sense. He cut the engine and stepped out, his heart pounding as he moved closer to the vehicle. The scent of its warm engine filled the garage. He glanced at the license plate and didn't recognize it. A wave of irritation began to build. This was his property, his private space. Who would dare park here without permission? Thomas quickly scanned for a note under the windshield or some sign of an emergency, but found none. The garage was otherwise untouched. His tools and bikes were still in place. It wasn't a burglary. Someone had simply taken the liberty of using his personal property as their own. The audacity of it shocked him. Years of keeping his head down, paying his HOA dues, and complying with every little rule came flooding back to him. In that moment, the violation felt deeply personal. This wasn't just a car, it was a statement of power and entitlement, sitting in his driveway like an uninvited guest. He stepped back, staring at the vehicle, his mind spinning. He had always played by the rule. He had endured letters about the color of his shutters, fines for leaving his trash can out too long, and passive-aggressive HOA newsletters. But this was different. This was his space, his line in the sand. He felt a mix of confusion, anger, and disbelief as the situation sank in. His quiet evening had just been upended by something far more invasive than an unsolicited fine. Someone had invaded his personal sanctuary without warning. As he presses his garage remote, he notices a large SUV parked inside his private space. The moment felt surreal, as if the familiar act of returning home had been hijacked by a stranger. Thomas's thumb still hovered over the remote as the garage door clattered fully open, revealing the intruder. The large SUV dominated the small space, its presence both physical and symbolic. Every inch of the polished black paint seemed to glisten under the garage light, throwing his own reflection back at him, a reflection of a man who had never been openly defied in his own home until now. The weight of realization pressed down on him. The SUV wasn't just any vehicle. It was Patricia Vaughn's, the very same Patricia who had, for years, wielded her position on the HOA board like a weapon. She was infamous for issuing fines over minor infractions, a lawn ornament too colorful, a holiday decoration hung a day late, a trash bin not perfectly aligned with the curb. Patricia's SUV wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act. Thomas's mind replayed past interactions with her. The curt emails, the dismissive remarks at HOA meetings, the smug way she would say rules are rules. Now here she was, breaking the most basic rule of property and privacy. Thomas took a steadying breath, the hum of the SUV's engine still faintly ticking as it cooled. He could almost hear Patricia's voice in his head, rationalizing her action as official HOA business, or some vague policy she'd concocted to justify trespassing. But the violation cut deeper than any letter or fine ever had. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was brazen. The garage was his domain, a space no HOA regulation could touch. And yet here it was, occupied without consent. He scanned the surrounding area, peering out toward the street through the small window. No Patricia in sight. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the usual evening joggers and dog walkers replaced by an uneasy stillness. The SUV sat there like a provocation, daring him to react. Thomas's hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the sudden jolt of adrenaline. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake. He knew it in his gut. This was Patricia's way of asserting control, a move so outrageous it could only be meant to test. His mind darted to the countless times neighbors had complained about Patricia's tactics, but had backed down to avoid trouble. He thought of the whispered conversations about her power plays, the resignation of those who felt the HOA was untouchable. But tonight was different. Tonight, Patricia had overstepped in a way that no one could ignore. Thomas felt a shift inside himself, a flicker of resolve igniting. He took another step closer to the SUV, running his eyes along its pristine finish, noting the vanity plate that confirmed what he already knew. The license plate frame bore the HOA's slogan, a detail so absurd it almost made him laugh. The brazenness of it all pushed him past shock into clarity. This wasn't simply about a car parked in the wrong spot. This was about boundaries, power, and standing up to a bully. Thomas reached up and pressed the garage remote again, this time lowering the door with a quiet, deliberate motion. The door clattered shut, sealing the SUV inside. The metallic thud echoed through the garage, a sound of finality and control. For the first time in years, Thomas felt like he was drawing a line Patricia couldn't cross. In that moment, his garage was no longer just a place to park his car. It was a battleground, and he had just claimed the high ground. Would you like me to continue expanding this into a scene-by-scene narrative for the next keynote so it reads like a dramatic short story? Shocked, Thomas confirms it's not his wife's or a delivery vehicle, it's a stranger's car. The confirmation hits him with a cold clarity that makes the hairs on his arms rise. He had been hoping for some simple, benign explanation. Maybe his wife's friend had stopped by. Maybe a courier had left something large inside. Maybe even a neighbor's car had rolled in by accident. But no such explanation exists. His wife is at her sister's house. The security camera alerts show no delivery trucks, and the plate on the SUV is one he's never seen before. The moment feels invasive in a way that rattles his core. This isn't just a parked car. This is a trespass. Thomas steps further into the garage, his footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. He crouches slightly to peer through the tinted window of the SUV, but sees nothing but his own reflection and the dim outline of leather seat. The smell of expensive air freshener drifts out from the cracked window, an odd detail that only sharpens his sense of violation. He notices the car is angled perfectly inside his garage, as if someone had taken their time backing it in, aligning it just so. The nose inches from his workbench. This wasn't a rushed move or an emergency. It was deliberate, confident, entitled. He glances toward the door that leads from the garage into his kitchen. Locked. As always, relief flickers. At least whoever drove this hasn't made it inside his home. Still, the idea that a stranger, or worse, an adversary, had entered his garage without permission unsettles him. He thinks of the countless little skirmishes with the HOA, the notices Patricia has sent him over shrub height, or the position of his trash can. It dawns on him that this could only be her doing. The SUV fits her style, shiny, oversized, a rolling declaration of self-importance. His heart beats faster as he starts to connect the dots. This is Patricia's latest power move. Not a mistake. She's used rules and regulations against him for years. Now she's stepped onto his property. The unfairness of it burns in his chest. He pictures her smug expression at board meetings, the clipped tone in her voice when she tells homeowners what they need to understand about community standards. She has always acted like the neighborhood is her kingdom, and tonight she has rolled right up into his garage as if to plant a flag. He rubs his temple, pacing slightly. This is no longer a question of etiquette or misunderstanding. It's a matter of boundaries and property rights. He feels his quiet patience cracking. All the times he's tried to be the bigger person, to avoid confrontation, suddenly feel like mistakes. This intrusion is too bold, too obvious to ignore. The SUV's presence in his garage is a physical manifestation of years of overreach. And now he is standing face to face with it, the engine still faintly clicking as it cools in his space. The SUV belongs to Patricia Vaughn, a notorious HOA board member known for petty citations. Recognition is like a flash of lightning in Thomas's mind. He doesn't need a witness to tell him. It's written all over the details of the car. The personalized license plate frame boasting a slogan about community standards. The faint scent of the expensive perfume Patricia wears to meetings. The HOA parking permit stuck to the windshield. It all lines up with the woman who has made his life in this neighborhood a long, exhausting negotiation. Patricia Vaughn has been the face of the HOA's heavy hand for as long as Thomas has lived here. She's the one who knocked on doors to point out mailbox chips, who wrote up fines for leaving a lawn chair on the porch overnight, who sent letters about wind chimes being too disruptive. Neighbors whisper about her but rarely challenge. People roll their eyes and comply because fighting the HOA costs time, money, and peace of mind. Patricia thrives on that resignation. She shows up at meetings in tailored blazers, wielding bylaws like weapons, smiling a thin, polite smile when she tells people they've violated some obscure rule. Now her SUV sits in Thomas's garage like a throne. He can almost picture her smugness as she parked it. Maybe she thought he wouldn't be home. that she could use his space as some kind of makeshift headquarters while inspecting infractions on his street. Maybe she thinks her position makes her untouchable. For years Patricia has believed that the rules apply only when she's the one enforcing them. Seeing her vehicle here, bold and unhidden, confirms every suspicion Thomas has had about her abuse of power. He circles the SUV slowly, taking in the arrogance of the act. The glossy paint reflects his frown. He notices a clipboard lying on the passenger seat, papers with HOA letterhead fluttering under the air vent. The sight makes his stomach twist. She really did think this was her. He feels a flicker of incredulity. In all his years dealing with Patricia, he never imagined she would physically invade his property. But here it is, undeniable and brazen, like a signature scrawled across his garage floor. The neighborhood around them has been simmering with resentment for months. He remembers conversations at block parties where neighbors vented about unjust fines, whispered about retaliation but ultimately shrugged it off. Patricia's tactics created a culture of quiet compliance, but Thomas senses that something about this moment is different. If she can do this to him, enter his garage, park her SUV, leave it sitting there like she owns it, she can do it to anyone. And that thought sparks a surge of determination. He runs his hand along the wall to the garage door control, the faint vibration of the door motor still humming in the air. He looks at the SUV again, then at the locked door to his house. He feels anger giving way to a sharper clarity. This isn't just about Patricia, it's about the unspoken contract of respect between neighbors that she has just shattered. Her SUV may have rolled into his garage on 4 wheels, but it carries years of grievances on its roof. Thomas realizes this moment is bigger than his own inconvenience. He thinks about how Patricia has always appeared at his door with her clipped tone, how she has always acted as if she's above reproach. Now the tables have turned. Her car is at his mercy. Her arrogance has driven it here. He can already feel the energy shifting, the possibility of pushing. The black SUV gleams under the harsh garage light, and for the first time Thomas feels the weight of every neighbor she's wronged standing with him in spirit. Her name, her reputation, and her vehicle are no longer abstract frustration. They are right here, tangible and undeniable, daring him to act. Patricia had a history of targeting Thomas with repeated fines and complaints. Long before the SUV appeared in his garage, Thomas's relationship with her had been a slow burn of irritation and disbelief. When he first moved into the neighborhood, he had been meticulous about following the HOA guidelines. He painted his shutters the approved color, kept his lawn edged and neat, and even refrained from installing the basketball hoop his nephews had begged for. Yet despite his diligence, the letters from Patricia began arriving within weeks. They were always written in that stiff, officious tone, citing bylaws and referencing clauses in the Community Standards Handbook. The first one was about a garden flag he'd placed near his porch. A simple flag, neutral in color but apparently not in compliance with height restrictions. He removed it immediately, thinking it would be the last time. The second letter arrived about the positioning of his garbage bin, claiming it was visible from the street for longer than permitted. That fine cost him $50. The third letter targeted a potted plant on his porch, alleging it obstructed uniform appearance. Each time Thomas complied without complaint, telling himself it was easier than fighting. But it never ended. Patricia always found something. She cited him for a minor crack in his driveway, for leaving his Christmas lights up a day too long, for hosting a backyard barbecue with music she deemed too loud even though it ended at 8 in the evening. Other neighbors had their run-ins with the HOA too, but Thomas's seemed relentless, like she had singled him out. He began to notice how Patricia would slow her SUV when passing his house, eyes scanning like a hawk. He overheard her once at a meeting saying homeowners needed to be reminded who sets the standards, as though she wasn't a volunteer board member, but a sheriff enforcing law and order. Her pattern of behavior became an unspoken truth on the block. People would roll their eyes when her name came up, muttering stories of their own. A mother fined for letting her child's bike sit by the garage door overnight. An elderly couple warned about the size of their bird bath. A family reprimanded for planting the wrong type of tree. Yet no one formally challenged her. It cost money to hire lawyers, time to attend hearings, and energy to fight someone who reveled in process and paperwork. Patricia thrived on that imbalance. Her letters came with a subtle threat: comply or escalate, and most homeowners, Thomas included, chose compliance. Over time though, the petty complaints eroded his sense of belonging. His home no longer felt like a refuge, but a space under surveillance. He stopped planting flowers because he feared they might be the wrong kind. He timed his trash removal down to the minute. He avoided inviting friends over in case their cars drew unwanted attention. Patricia had turned his participation in the neighborhood from a simple act of living into a cautious game of chess. And each time he moved his piece, she responded with another citation.
He had wondered more than once if her focus on him was personal. Maybe she resented his independence. Maybe she thought he was an easy target, because he had never fought back. Or maybe she simply liked the power. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Years of irritation, a stack of letters filed away in a folder he labeled HOA nonsense, and a slow-building resentment that he had tried to smother for the sake of peace. But peace had a cost, and the SUV in his garage was proof that compliance only emboldened her. She believed she had the right to park anywhere for HOA business, including his garage. That sense of entitlement wasn't just an assumption, it had been cultivated over time. Patricia had built an identity around being the enforcer. She often reminded residents at meetings that the board has broad discretion, and that community welfare sometimes requires access. In her mind, the HOA wasn't a collection of elected volunteers managing shared spaces. It was a governing body with near-sovereign power over private property. Thomas could picture her rationalizing it even now. Perhaps she had been on her way to inspect a violation somewhere on the block, and decided she needed to temporarily use his garage for her paperwork. Maybe she had some flimsy justification like needing to protect HOA property, or official business that in her mind made trespassing permissible. But those mental gymnastics didn't change the reality. The garage was his, not the HOA. There was no rule, no bylaw, no emergency clause that granted a board member the right to commandeer a homeowner's private space. Patricia's belief in her own authority had grown over years of unchecked behavior. She wielded fines like tickets, warnings like summons. People feared her not because she had actual power, but because she was willing to use intimidation and bureaucracy to get her way. That fear gave her a freedom most board members wouldn't dare take. And now it had reached its most audacious form, parking her SUV in a resident's garage without asking. The SUV itself was a symbol of her worldview. It was big, glossy, and outfitted with every luxury: heated seats, tinted windows, chrome. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a mobile office, a rolling fortress from which she could survey her neighborhood. Residents had seen her sitting in it with her clipboard, jotting notes about overgrown hedges or unsanctioned decor. She once bragged at a meeting about catching a homeowner's trash violation, because she had been making rounds late at night. The SUV was her badge of office, her chariot, and now it sat in Thomas's garage like a statement. She could go anywhere, do anything, and no one would stop. Thomas stood in front of it, seeing more than metal and glass. He saw every fine he had paid, every letter he had received, every quiet moment he had surrendered to avoid conflict. The SUV's bulk pressed against him like a challenge. Patricia believed her HOA status gave her the right to occupy his space. But standing there, Thomas felt the first stirrings of a different truth, that her power existed only because people allowed it. The idea unsettled him and energized him at the same time. He imagined Patricia's reasoning as she parked. Maybe she thought he'd be at work late, that he'd never know. Maybe she figured even if he found out he'd grumble but let it go, as everyone always did. In her mind, the rules bent toward her will because no one had ever forced them. The sheer arrogance of it hung in the air. Her SUV smelled like leather and entitlement. It gleamed like a trophy she had placed in his garage to mark conquered territory. But this wasn't common space. It wasn't a park bench or a pool chair. It was his garage, his walls, his floor, his... She had crossed from shared governance into personal trespass. The reality of that distinction beat like a drum in his chest as he stared at the vehicle. Years of compliance and patience had led to this moment, this gleaming black symbol of unchecked authority sitting where his car should be. Patricia might have believed she had the right to park there, but belief and law were two very different things.
Thomas remains calm but decides to lock the garage door from the inside, trapping the SUV. He feels the tremor of anger in his chest, but keeps his movements measured, his breathing even. Years of swallowing frustration have taught him the value of control. He crosses the garage in 3 slow strides, his shoes scuffing against the concrete, and presses the manual lock on the wall panel. A heavy click echoes through the space as the door bolts into place. The SUV's tinted windows gleam under the overhead bulb, silent and immobile now, like an animal caged. He lets his hand linger on the lock for a second, feeling the cool metal under his fingertips. This small gesture isn't a tantrum, it's a boundary being drawn. His heart thuds against his ribs, the air in the garage suddenly feeling denser, but his hands are steady. He steps back, eyes fixed on the black vehicle, aware of the shift inside himself. Patricia's brazen intrusion is no longer an abstract offense. He can file away. It's a physical challenge sitting in his space. Locking the door isn't revenge, it's reclamation. Keynote, No. 8. He calls a non-emergency police line to report an unauthorized vehicle in his property. The phone feels warm against his ear, As he waits for the line to connect, the faint buzz of the dial tone a counterpoint to the steady ticking of the SUV's cooling engine. When the dispatcher answers, Thomas keeps his voice even, deliberate, explaining that a vehicle belonging to an HOA board member has entered and parked inside his private garage without permission. He recites his address, provides the license plate number, and clarifies that there's no immediate violence, no break-in, only a blatant trespass. His tone is polite but firm, an edge of steel running beneath the calm words. The dispatcher asks a few questions, whether he knows the driver, whether there are signs of forced entry, and Thomas answers each one with crisp precision, his eyes still fixed on the SUV's dark windows as though it might shift at any moment. As he hangs up, the silence of the garage wraps around him. The lock is engaged, the phone call made, and for the first time in years he's no longer reacting to Patricia's power, but meeting it head-on. Patricia storms up to Thomas's door, demanding he open the garage, calling him hostile. Her heels strike the driveway like tiny hammers, her silhouette framed by the glow of the porch light. She doesn't knock so much as pound, fists sharp against the wood. Through the peephole, Thomas sees her face taut with outrage, lips moving fast, eyes scanning for a weakness. She calls out his name in that clipped tone she uses at HOA meetings, ordering him to comply, accusing him of aggression, twisting the situation as if she were the victim. Her voice carries down the street, a high-pitched demand laced with disbelief that anyone would dare to defy her. The porch light catches on the clipboard in her hand, papers fluttering like angry wings as she jabs it toward the door for emphasis. Keynote: no. Neighbors begin to notice the commotion and gather on the sidewalks, recording on phone. Curtains shift, doors crack open, and faces appear in the dim evening light. A couple across the street steps onto their porch, arms crossed. Two teenagers raise their phones, their screens glowing as they hit record. The murmur of quiet conversation ripples outward, as more residents drift closer, curiosity turning into recognition. They see Patricia's stance, her pounding on Thomas's door, and the dark SUV sitting inside his garage behind a lowered door. The air takes on a charge, like a storm about to break, as whispers travel from one neighbor to another, and the crowd thickens at the edge of the driveway. Some neighbors voice support for Thomas, sharing their own grievances against the HOA. At first it starts as a low rumble among the small crowd gathered on the sidewalk, a scattering of murmurs exchanged between couples and friends. But as Patricia's voice rises, so too do theirs. People who had quietly tolerated her reign of fines and citations begin to speak up. A man from 3 houses down mutters to his wife, "That's the same thing she did to me with the mailbox." Another woman, arms crossed tight against her chest, says loud enough for others to hear, "She fined me $200 for having a trampoline in the backyard." The words carry, each complaint igniting another. Soon the soft muttering becomes a chorus of shared frustrations. Thomas can hear it through the door, the shift in the crowd's tone, the brittle undercurrent of long-held resentment breaking free. A neighbor calls out, "Leave him alone, Patricia." Someone else shouts, "You don't own the neighborhood." The calls aren't coordinated, but they rise naturally, like a tide. People begin recounting their stories openly, names and incidents tumbling into the open air, fines for pet noise that didn't exist, warnings about unapproved flower beds, citations for paint colors that matched the HOA palette but looked too bright. These stories, once confined to whispered conversations over fences or in private Facebook groups, are now public and loud. The crowd starts shifting physically as well. Instead of standing back passively, neighbors edge closer to Thomas's driveway, forming a loose semicircle. A couple of them hold up their phones not just to record, but to read out the very letters Patricia had sent them, screenshots and PDFs saved for years in digital folders. One man reads aloud a particularly condescending line from a notice she'd sent him about maintaining appropriate curb appeal. Another woman adds, "She told me to take down my kid's swing set. Said it lowered property values." The sound of her voice cracks with anger and exhaustion. Patricia's attempts to command the situation grow sharper, but each barked order only draws more People who have never spoken directly to Thomas before find themselves rallying around him. The driveway becomes a kind of impromptu town square, grievances spilling out into the night like a collective exhale. For the first time, Thomas realizes just how many of his neighbors have been quietly enduring the same harassment he's faced. He watches from behind the door as their faces, lit by phone screens and porch lights, tilt toward one another in solidarity. There's an electricity in the air, a sense of a curtain being pulled back. He can hear specific names and addresses, The detailed stories of humiliation and fines. A retired veteran talks about being cited for an American flag placed at the wrong angle. A young couple explains they were threatened with legal action over a small doghouse that wasn't approved. The effect is cumulative. Each story validates the next. Each voice emboldens another. The collective narrative is no longer just about Thomas's garage, but about years of unchecked overreach. He feels a pulse of recognition that this moment has become bigger than him. It's no longer one homeowner against a board member. It's the neighborhood confronting the embodiment of a system that has been suffocating them. Inside the house, Thomas leans against the door, absorbing the sound of neighbors defending him, defending themselves. For years he had felt alone in his frustration, but now he realizes there was a silent majority all along, their patience worn thin. The street is no longer quiet. It has become a forum. People are not just venting but naming their boundaries out loud. It's as if the SUV in his garage has cracked open a vault of grievances no one dared to open before. Keynote number 12. Patricia threatens legal action and calls a friend on the police force to intervene. Her phone is out within seconds, screen glowing blue against her face. She punches at the screen with quick, jerky taps, muttering under her breath about liability and trespassing claims as though she's the one wronged. The shift in her posture is stark. She's gone from pounding on Thomas's door to pacing the driveway like a general rallying troop. She holds the phone to her ear, speaking in clipped phrases to someone she calls by their first name, her voice rising and falling in urgent tones. The crowd can hear snippets. He's locking my car in his garage. Yes, he's being hostile. This is harassment. I need someone down here now. The neighbors exchange glances, their skepticism plain. A few whisper about how Patricia has long bragged about her connections in local law enforcement. One man mutters, "She pulled this on me too, said she'd call her friend at the precinct." A woman replies, "Yeah, she always says she has people who'll back her up." The crowd's murmuring grows louder, shifting from sympathy to incredulity. Phones are held higher now, capturing every word. Someone says loudly enough for Patricia to hear, "Go ahead and call. We're all filming." Patricia steps away from the door and into the street, trying to create a zone of authority around herself. She paces in small circles, one hand on her hip, the other holding the phone like a badge. She raises her voice intentionally, making sure everyone hears her side of the story. Casting herself as the victim of an unhinged homeowner, she uses words like detained, hostage, illegal, painting a picture of a situation far more dramatic than reality. But the black SUV sitting calmly inside Thomas's closed garage undermines her narrative. Thomas watches from the window, noting how she glances at the crowd, how her eyes dart nervously toward the phones. He can see the cracks in her composure. This isn't the confident board member presiding over a meeting. This is someone scrambling to retain control of a situation slipping away. Her free hand trembles slightly as she gestures. She keeps looking down the street, perhaps expecting sirens any second, perhaps hoping her call will conjure authority to her side. The neighbors, meanwhile, start narrating the scene themselves. One says, "She's calling her cop buddy." Another adds, "She thinks that'll scare him." There's a low laugh from someone near the curb. The collective mood shifts from mere frustration to a kind of grim amusement at her theatrics. They've seen her wield power through paperwork and fines, but watching her try to summon it here, in real time, feels different. The phones recording are no longer just witnesses, they're shields. Each glowing screen is a silent message. This time you're not in the shadows. Patricia's voice sharpens as she insists to the person on the other end of the line that she's in fear for her safety. She paces again, snapping her fingers at no one in particular as if giving silent orders. Her tone is performative, rising when she knows she's being filmed, lowering when she turns her back. She clutches the phone tight, her knuckles pale. The crowd's whispers grow bolder, people openly commenting on her behavior. Someone calls out, "You're trespassing, Patricia." Another shouts, "You're not above the law." The chorus of voices grows stronger, overlapping with the sound of her voice on the call. Even without seeing her expression up close, Thomas can sense the desperation setting in. The power dynamic is shifting. Patricia has always relied on being the authority in the room, on having the final say, but now she's the one surrounded, her actions documented, her narrative challenged. The call to her police contact is supposed to restore order, but it only highlights how far she's gone beyond acceptable boundaries. Her SUV sits locked behind a garage door that isn't hers. Her reputation is being dissected in real time by the very people she has policed for years, and the badge of authority she once brandished. The HOA suddenly looks like a paper crown in the glow of dozens of phone screens. She keeps her phone to her ear, pacing, repeating key phrases, glancing toward Thomas's house as though expecting him to crumble under the pressure. But inside, Thomas stands still, hands at his sides,
listening to the rising tide of voices outside. He notices the slight waver in Patricia's stance, the way her shoulders lift and fall more quickly, the way her words become clipped and sharp. The crowd continues to shift, people from further down the street arriving, their faces curious and then resolute as they take in the scene. What began as one man locking his garage has transformed into a public confrontation, and Patricia's threat of legal action and police intervention has only poured fuel on the fire of neighborhood resentment. A responding officer initially sides with Patricia, showing bias without assessing facts. The first patrol car rolls into the neighborhood quietly, its headlights cutting across manicured lawns and parked SUVs, as though entering a crime scene. Neighbors edge back a little, phones still held high. When the officer steps out, the night air is heavy with anticipation. His uniform is crisp, his expression neutral but alert. Patricia straightens her posture instantly, phone still in her hand but now lowered at her side like a finished performance. She strides toward him with the confidence of someone who expects to be believed, her voice slipping into a practiced tremor as she recounts her version of events. Thomas watches through the window as she gestures toward the garage and then toward his door, pointing with clipped precision as if building a case. The officer nods along, scribbling something on a notepad, his eyes flicking only briefly to the onlookers. Patricia speaks rapidly, peppering her story with charged words: hostile, detained, threatening. She tilts her head at just the right angle, her voice soft but firm, like someone trying to calm a skittish animal. To anyone unfamiliar with the history of this street, it would sound plausible: an HOA board member just doing her duty, a homeowner flying off the handle. The officer approaches the porch, his hand resting lightly on his duty belt, posture signaling authority but not aggression. He knocks firmly, his tone clipped but not unkind, as he calls Thomas's name. Through the door, Thomas can hear Patricia's voice again, lower now but insistent, feeding the narrative. The crowd murmurs, some muttering under their breath, others whispering directly into their phones, as they live stream or text friends. The tension is tangible, decades of suburban politeness are fraying. When Thomas opens the door a crack, the officer's first words are procedural but telling. He asks Thomas to step outside, to clear up a misunderstanding. His tone carries an assumption of wrongdoing, as though Patricia's version is already accepted fact. He doesn't ask whether Thomas is safe, doesn't inquire about trespass or property rights. He asks why he has locked someone in his garage. The phrasing hits Thomas like a slap. Locked someone in his garage, as if the SUV is a person, as if Patricia herself has been detained rather than her car simply being kept from leaving after it trespassed. Thomas stays calm, gripping the edge of the door with steady fingers. He explains in measured words that the SUV in the garage belongs to someone who parked without permission, that he's called the non-emergency line to report it, that he hasn't touched or threatened anyone. The officer listens but his body language doesn't change. His eyes keep darting toward Patricia, who now stands off to the side, her arms crossed, chin raised, looking like a plaintiff waiting for judgment. She catches the officer's eye and gives a faint, knowing smile. The neighbors react quietly at first, exchanging looks that say they've seen this play before. One woman whispers, "He's not even asking her why she was in his garage." Another man shakes his head and mutters, "They always believe." The phones are still up, cameras still rolling, but the crowd leans in, listening for every word. The officer's questions to Thomas seem focused on de-escalating him, not on questioning Patricia's actions. He suggests maybe Thomas should open the garage, just so we can all talk. The suggestion isn't a command, but it carries the weight of expectation. Thomas glances past the officer to the faces of his neighbors, their brows furrowed, their lips pressed tight. He senses their frustration mirroring his own. He's polite but firm in response, reiterating that it's his property, that he hasn't detained anyone, that the person who trespassed is standing outside right now. He points out that Patricia's vehicle is inside because she parked it there, not because he invited her or blocked her. The officer nods, scribbles something again, but his questions don't shift. Patricia hovers nearby, interjecting softly about how she felt threatened, and just needed a place to park for HOA inspection. The imbalance is palpable. For years Patricia's authority came from bylaws and fines. Now it's coming from perception, from the officer's instinct to believe the person who sounds like they're in charge. Thomas feels the weight of it pressing down on him, but he also feels the eyes of his neighbors on his back, their presence a quiet reinforcement. He's no longer a man alone in a dispute. He's a man standing at the threshold of his house, with a neighborhood behind him.
Thomas calmly shows the deed, security footage, and HOA rules, proving Patricia trespassed. He doesn't raise his voice or make dramatic gestures. Instead, he takes a deliberate step back into the hallway, retrieves a slim folder from the table just inside the door, and returns to the porch with it in his hands. The folder is worn at the edges from years of use. Inside it are copies of every letter Patricia ever sent him, a printout of his property deed, and screenshots of the HOA's own bylaws. He flips it open with the steady assurance of someone who has been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. First he shows the officer the deed, his name printed clearly, the boundaries of his property marked in black and white. Then he hands over a tablet with security footage queued up, Patricia's SUV rolling smoothly into his driveway, the garage door rising because of the remote she somehow had, her vehicle pulling inside without invitation. The video is time-stamped, the angle perfect, leaving no doubt. Thomas doesn't editorialize or add commentary. He simply lets the images play while the officer watches. Next he points to the section of the HOA handbook, stating explicitly that board members have no right to enter private property without written consent or a legal emergency. The clause is highlighted in yellow. He explains quietly that there was no emergency, no consent, and that his call to the non-emergency line was to ensure proper reporting. His voice is low but carries clear enough for the nearby crowd to hear every word. The effect is subtle but immediate. The officer's posture shifts slightly, his brow furrowing as he looks back at Patricia. He scrolls through the footage again, slower this time. His pen paused above his notepad. Patricia's face tightens, her arms uncrossed. She begins to speak but stops, glancing at the crowd, at the glowing phones capturing every flicker of her expression. The air seems to change temperature, the earlier confidence draining from her stand. Thomas stays composed, holding out the documents like a teacher presenting evidence in a classroom. He's careful not to sound accusatory, only factual. This isn't about anger, it's about proof. Neighbors inch closer, their murmurs turning into quiet exclamations as they glimpse the footage over the officer's shoulder. Someone whispers, "She really did it." Another adds, "Caught on camera." The circle around the driveway tightens, not threatening but solid, a community witnessing the truth for the first time in public. The officer clears his throat, glancing between the tablet and Patricia. His questions begin to change. He asks Patricia where she got the remote to open Thomas's garage. She stammers, her practiced tone faltering. She claims she needed access, but can't produce any document granting it. The officer flips through the highlighted rules again, his jaw tightening. Patricia tries to regain control, saying she was acting for the good of the community, but the words ring hollow against the printed text and the glowing footage. Neighbors start speaking more boldly now. "We told you," someone calls. "You can't just do whatever you want." Another voice adds, "That's trespassing." Phones tilt forward, capturing the moment like a courtroom audience leaning in for the verdict. Patricia's eyes flick to each camera, her mouth opening and closing as she searches for a new narrative. The clipboard in her hand droops toward her side, the papers inside fluttering weakly in the evening breeze. Thomas's calm becomes a kind of anchor in the scene. His evidence is meticulous, his demeanor measured. He isn't pleading, The officer asks a few more pointed questions, and each time Thomas produces another page, another screenshot, another piece of documentation. The folder becomes a silent counterweight to Patricia's years of authority, each sheet of paper chipping away at her credibility. What was once an uneven confrontation now feels like a rebalancing. The crowd senses it too. They shift from murmuring to nodding, some exchanging small smiles, others raising their phones a little higher. The evidence isn't just exonerating Thomas, it's validating their own experience. They see in the footage, and the highlighted rules, a mirror of their own frustrations, proof that what they endured wasn't paranoia or bad luck but a pattern of overreach. Patricia's SUV, once a symbol of her control, now sits locked behind the garage door as a silent exhibit in the case against her behavior. The officer's notepad is no longer moving as quickly. His posture softens toward Thomas, and hardens toward Patricia. He scrolls back on the tablet, replays the footage, and asks her again, slower this time, why she entered the garage. Her answers grow shorter, less coherent. She gestures vaguely toward the street, mutters about needing to check something, but the conviction is gone. The glow of authority she carried into the driveway has dimmed, replaced by the pale light of phone screens and the cool weight of documented truth held in Thomas's steady hands. The crowd grows louder, chanting for fairness, and exposing Patricia's long-term abuses. What begins as a few murmured comments rippling through the cluster of neighbors quickly becomes a low hum, then rises into something like a chorus. People who had once only vented in private messages or whispered complaints at mailbox clusters now find themselves shoulder to shoulder in the dusk, their voices carrying over the trimmed hedges and manicured lawns. One man, A father who'd been fined repeatedly for leaving his children's bikes near the sidewalk speaks first, his words sharp and clear enough to cut the tension. Another neighbor chimes in, recounting how Patricia threatened to issue citations over a garden hose left coiled by a garage door. Each small story snaps into place like tiles in a mosaic, forming a larger picture of years of petty intimidation and selective enforcement. Phone screens glow brighter as more people hit record, comment sections of live streams filling with viewers who recognize the pattern. The air is charged with more than curiosity now, its indignation taking shape in real time. The woman who lives 2 houses down, known for her usually quiet demeanor, steps forward and raises her voice, accusing Patricia of singling out families of color for fines while ignoring the same violations committed by her friends on the board. Her voice trembles at first, but steadies as others murmur agreement. A young couple repeats the same refrain, "Enough is enough," until it spreads through the crowd like a call and response. Children peer from behind their parents' legs, eyes wide, sensing the unusual energy, while teenagers stand on the curb filming everything, their fingers scrolling across screens as notifications flood in. Neighbors begin to recount the small humiliations of the past few years. The notes slipped under doors, the emails threatening fines over holiday decorations, the feeling of being watched. Each anecdote lands like a pebble in a still pond, sending ripples outward, until the surface of the evening is alive with overlapping voices. Patricia stands at the edge of the driveway, her clipboard sagging in her hand, looking from face to face as if trying to find an ally and finding none. The crowd isn't a mob, it's a memory made visible, a collective record of grievances suddenly spoken aloud. Someone starts chanting "fairness now," and within moments others pick it up, their voices echoing off the stucco walls of the house. What had been a silent, dispersed frustration has become a single sound, and that sound grows louder with each breath. Through the phones and the chants there's an undercurrent of relief. People who'd thought they were alone in their struggles see their stories reflected back at them, validated not just by Thomas's calm stand but by their neighbors' willingness to speak. It's no longer one man against an HOA board member. It's a community naming the imbalance that's been there all along. The air vibrates with it, a subtle trembling that carries through the soles of shoes and the timbre of voices. Patricia tries to speak, but the words are swallowed by the chant, by the surge of years of silence breaking open in one suburban driveway. Another officer arrives, reviews evidence, and warns Patricia she could be arrested. The second cruiser turns onto the street slowly, its lights pulsing in muted flashes, no siren but a presence impossible to ignore. The chanting softens just enough to make way for this new arrival. The officer who steps out is older, his movements deliberate, his eyes scanning not just the main players but the crowd, the phones, the overall temperature of the scene. He exchanges a quick look with the first officer, a silent conversation passing between them, then walks up to Thomas's porch without hurry. Thomas meets him at the door, folder still in hand, tablet still cued to the footage. The new officer listens without interrupting, his brow furrowing slightly as he watches the video of Patricia pulling into the garage, his gaze flicking to the highlighted HOA rules. He asks a few short, pointed questions. Who owns the property? Whether permission was given? Whether there's any emergency that would justify entry? And Thomas answers with the same quiet precision as before. The officer nods slowly, then turns his attention to Patricia. His tone is measured but carries authority in a way the first officer's didn't. He asks her directly where she got access to the garage. She hesitates, glancing at the crowd, then says something about needing to inspect, about having informal permission. The officer asks for proof of that permission. She can't provide it. The clipboard in her hand now looks less like a symbol of authority, and more like a flimsy shield. Her voice, which had been firm and commanding earlier, wavers slightly as she insists she was only doing her job. The crowd's phones tilt forward, capturing every flicker of expression. The officer reviews the footage again, points to the highlighted clause, and explains in a low, even voice that entering someone's private garage without consent is trespassing. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. The words carry the weight of law and procedure, and the crowd hears them clearly. He tells Patricia she could be cited or even arrested if she doesn't step back and resolve the situation properly. There's no drama in his delivery, just the kind of quiet certainty that shifts an entire dynamic. Neighbors lean in, the earlier chant dying into a hush as they listen. Some exchange glances of astonishment. This is the first time they've heard an authority figure say out loud what they've known for years. The first officer's posture shifts too, shoulders easing, as if the second's presence has recalibrated the scene. Patricia tries to argue again, but her voice is smaller now, a tremor at the edge. She glances at the SUV behind the locked garage door,
at the phones, at the faces of people she once fined or warned. The second officer asks her again, calmly, whether she understands the seriousness of what she's done. He gestures toward the garage, toward the evidence in Thomas's hands, toward the crowd that has borne witness. His words aren't loud, but they're final in tone, the sound of a line being drawn. He explains that her position on the HOA board doesn't grant her immunity from trespassing laws, that doing her job doesn't mean bypassing property rights. Patricia's expression flickers from disbelief to calculation, to something that looks like fear. The atmosphere in the driveway shifts with that acknowledgement. Neighbors straighten, some murmuring approval, some simply exhaling after holding their breath for too long. The glow from the phones reflects off the officer's badge, catching in Patricia's eyes as she tries to compose herself. The SUV behind the garage door sits silent and still, no longer a symbol of her reach, but of her overstep, and the crowd senses that something fundamental has changed in the balance of power on their street. The tension escalates as Patricia tries to spin the story, but the cameras catch her lie. After the second officer's quiet but firm words, Patricia begins moving her hands as she talks, drawing shapes in the air, trying to build a new version of events out of gestures and fragments. Her voice rises in pitch, laced with tremors of indignation and disbelief, as she insists she was invited. Insists she had no choice. Insists she was protecting the community. The clipboard she once wielded like a gavel is now a prop, pages flapping as she gestures too wild. She reaches into her bag and produces a crumpled printout, holding it up as though it proves her point. But the nearest phones zoom in to reveal it's a generic HOA memo, with no signature, no address, no reference to Thomas. Each sentence she speaks feels rehearsed but brittle, like a stage set built too quickly, ready to collapse. She points at Thomas, at the garage, at the crowd, weaving claims about a safety check and an urgent situation, her eyes darting from the second officer to the first, searching for a sympathetic expression. The more she talks, the more the crowd murmur. People watching on their screens type fast, adding comments about contradictions they've noticed. First she said she was invited, then she said she needed to inspect, then she said she was threatened. Teenagers in hoodies whisper to each other, replaying clips of her earlier statements, and showing discrepancies to anyone near. Patricia tries a softer tone, calling Thomas by his first name, appealing to his reasonableness, and asking him to explain to the officers that it's all a misunderstanding. She tilts her head, smiles faintly, but the cameras catch the tightness at the corners of her mouth, the quick flick of her eyes as she glances at the phones. She shifts back to indignation, accusing the crowd of harassment, warning them about defamation. Her words sound bigger than the situation, inflated with years of unchallenged authority, but the images tell another story. The SUV sits behind the closed garage door like a sealed exhibit, and the footage of her driving in is still paused on Thomas's tablet, waiting to be replayed at a moment's notice. Every time she adds a new detail, someone in the crowd whispers, "That's not what she said before." A middle-aged man who has been silent until now speaks up, pointing out that she had no HOA appointment scheduled, that everyone on the block received the schedule weeks ago. Another neighbor holds up their phone, with a screenshot of the email Patricia herself sent out, showing the real inspection date still days away. The air grows tauter, like a string pulled tighter with every contradiction. Patricia's words keep coming but no longer land. They float, thin and transparent, unable to cover the evidence already in plain sight. Her body language betrays her more than her words do. She shifts her weight from one foot to the other, her free hand clenching into a fist at her side. She looks over her shoulder at the SUV, as if wishing it could vanish. The cameras catch it all, the micro-expressions, the slips, the sweat glinting at her hairline under the porch light. The digital age has turned the crowd into instant archivists, every movement stored and shared beyond the driveway in real time. Patricia seems to realize it mid-sentence, her eyes flicking to one of the live streams where comments scroll upward faster than she can speak. She starts to talk slower, choosing her words more carefully, but the damage is already recorded.
The HOA president is called to the scene and confirms Patricia acted outside her authority. Word travels fast. A neighbor on the edge of the crowd dials a number and speaks quietly, and minutes later, a silver sedan pulls up to the curb. Out steps the HOA president, a man in a dark jacket carrying a leather folio under his arm. He looks bewildered at the cluster of people, the glow of phone screens, the police cruisers parked under the streetlights. He adjusts his glasses as he walks up the driveway, scanning the faces, pausing briefly at the sight of Patricia standing near the officers, her clipboard drooping like a wilted flower. He introduces himself to the officers, shakes hands and asks what's going on. The second officer gives a concise account, then gestures toward Thomas's tablet, showing the footage. The president watches, his brows drawing together, as the video plays. When it ends, he exhales through his nose and flips open his folio, pulling out the official HOA inspection schedule. He holds it up so the officers can see, pointing to the date for Thomas's address clearly printed for next week. Then he turns to Patricia, his expression no longer neutral but edged with disappointment and something like exasperation. He asks her directly why she entered the garage. His tone is formal, like someone in a boardroom but sharper. She starts to answer, stumbling over her words, glancing at the cameras. He cuts in, clarifying that no board member has authority to enter private property without explicit consent or a legal order. He adds that no emergency was reported, no warrant obtained, no email or phone call logged. The words are steady, but they land like small hammers, each one removing a piece of her defense. The crowd hears them clearly, their murmurs swelling again, this time tinged with vindication. Patricia's face shifts through a carousel of emotions: shock, anger, appeal, denial. She tries to step closer to the president, lowering her voice as though to negotiate privately, but the microphones on the phones pick up every word. She mentions her years of service, her commitment to the neighborhood, her belief that she was acting in its best interest. The president shakes his head slowly, his lips pressing into a thin line. He states again, for the officers and the witnesses, that she was not authorized to be there, that the HOA will handle the violation internally, but that she is personally responsible for any legal consequences. The neighbors lean in, phones raised high. Some whisper, finally. Others nod at each other, a silent acknowledgement that the structure which once seemed untouchable has cracks. The president turns back to Thomas, his tone softening as he apologizes for the intrusion, assuring him that the board had no knowledge of this action. He adds that he'll be calling an emergency meeting to review procedures, that this kind of overreach cannot continue. The officers stand quietly as this unfolds, their pens poised above notepads. The second officer's gaze flicks from the president to Patricia, assessing the new hierarchy emerging right there on the driveway. The first officer, who had initially sided with Patricia, seems to recalibrate, his stance easing as he closes his notepad. The power dynamic that had tilted so heavily in Patricia's favor at the start of the evening, now tilts away from her, the shift visible in her shrinking gestures, and the crowd's growing steadiness. Patricia's SUV behind the closed garage door has become more than a trespass. It's a symbol of the unchecked authority she wielded for years and the moment that authority met a wall. The president's presence gives the scene an official weight, a public acknowledgement that what happened wasn't a misunderstanding but a breach. Phones capture the tableau. The police, the HOA president, Patricia with her clipboard lowered, Thomas standing in his doorway with documents in hand, the neighbors circling like witnesses in a modern town square. Each frame of video, sent out to social media, tells the same story: a line crossed, an authority challenged, and a community watching as the truth is spoken aloud. Patricia's SUV is eventually towed, and she faces both HOA sanctions and legal trouble. The tow truck's lights cast long rotating beams across the driveway, as a heavy chain clinks against metal. Neighbors watch as the vehicle that had been a symbol of intrusion is slowly winched out of the garage, its tires rolling reluctantly over the threshold. Phones rise higher to catch the moment the SUV is lifted onto the flatbed, straps tightened across its frame, the operator moving with quiet efficiency, while murmurs ripple through the crowd, a low soundtrack of astonishment and vindication. The incident sparks a movement in the neighborhood to reform the HOA's power structure. In the days that follow, group chats and porch conversations turn into meetings in living rooms where neighbors exchange stories and collect documentation, drafting petitions and proposing new rules. People who had never spoken to one another before begin sharing coffee and strategies, determined to rewrite bylaws, introduce transparency, and hold board members accountable, their newfound solidarity replacing years of quiet resentment.